pigs gone wild. Researchers found that Texas has the worst feral hog problem in the entire country.
The footage runs for 41 seconds, and for most of it, nothing happens. Green and gray static, the slow drift of grass in an infrared wind, a water trough at the bottom of the frame. This is a trail camera mounted on a fence post in the brush country of central Texas. The kind of camera that fires 1,000 throwaway frames a week. The kind nobody watches unless something goes wrong. And in this clip, at the 20-second mark, something does. A shape enters from the left, then another, then a third, fanning low and wide through the brush like they've done this 100 times before. When the people who study this terrain for a living finally sat down and played it back frame by frame, the room didn't go quiet because the footage was violent. It went quiet because of what it meant. Because for 2 years, across thousands of acres, entire populations of one of the most destructive animals in North America had simply been vanishing, and nobody could explain why. They had blamed disease. They had blamed hunters. They had spent millions of dollars and found nothing. And the answer had been right there in the static the whole time. Stay with this, because what officials discovered didn't make them double down. It made them stop. It made them call off the helicopters, ground the planes, and quietly back away. And the reason they backed away is the strangest part of the entire story. To understand what was happening, you have to understand the enemy. Because in Texas, the feral hog isn't a nuisance. It's an occupation. Right now, across the United States, biologists estimate there are roughly 6 million wild hogs roaming free. They've established themselves in at least 35 states, pushing north, pushing west, spreading into terrain they were never supposed to reach. But Texas is ground zero. More than 2 million of them churn through the hill country, the river bottoms, the ranch land, and the suburban edges, and they do not pass quietly. A mature feral hog can weigh well over 200 pounds. Some push past 300. They carry tusks that curve up from the jaw and sharpen themselves against each other as the animal grows. They have hides like armor and shoulders built like a battering ram. And they are hungry in a way that is almost industrial. A sounder, that's the word for a group of hogs, usually a few sows and their offspring, can move through a field at night and leave it looking like it was shelled. They don't graze. They root. They drive their snouts into the soil and plow it up in search of grubs, roots, anything edible. And in a single night, a sounder can tear a cornfield down to bare dirt. Fences buckle. Irrigation lines snap. Creek banks collapse into mud. The damage in the morning looks less like wildlife and more like heavy machinery rolled through in the dark. Put a number on it and the scale becomes hard to even picture. Feral hogs are estimated to cause around $2.5 billion in damage every single year in the United States. Not decline, not contain, climbing. In a bad season, a grain farmer in hog country can lose up to 10% of an entire crop to a population that arrives, eats, and vanishes before sunrise. That's not a pest problem. That's a tax on the land itself, paid in ruined harvests and broken equipment and topsoil washed downstream. And it doesn't stop at the field line. Hogs foul water sources with their wallowing. They carry diseases that can pass to livestock. They collide with cars on dark county roads with the force of a dropped engine block. They compete with native deer and turkey for food, and they devour the eggs of ground-nesting birds, the nests of reptiles, the slow and the small and the defenseless. Wherever the hogs go, the land gets poorer. And for decades, the hogs went everywhere they pleased. So, when the sounders started disappearing, the people who knew this land best didn't celebrate. They got nervous, because in places like Blanco County, in the rolling oak and cedar country west of Austin, the hogs had become a kind of background fact of life. Ranchers heard them at night, the grunting, the crashing through brush, the squeal of piglets. They saw the fresh wallows by the stock tanks every morning, the churned mud, the trails worn into game paths. They ran trail cameras that filled their memory cards with hog after hog after hog. The animals were a constant, an infestation you could set your watch by. And then, in certain pockets of the county, the constant just stopped. It didn't happen all at once. It happened the way silence happens. You notice it late. A rancher would walk a fence line he hadn't checked in a few weeks and realize the ground wasn't torn up anymore. The wallows had dried and crusted over. The trails were going to grass. He'd pull the card from a camera that used to log dozens of hogs a night and scroll through a week of footage with nothing on it but a curious raccoon and the wind. At first, men assumed they'd just gotten lucky. Maybe the hogs moved on. Maybe a neighbor had been trapping hard. But then the same thing turned up on the next property and the one after that. Whole sounders gone. Not thinned, gone. Places where 100 or more hogs had churned the earth for years went quiet and stayed quiet. And the woods that had felt overrun started to feel, in some unsettling way, empty. Wildlife officials began hearing the same reports from multiple landowners, and the reports didn't add up. If a disease was sweeping through, where were the carcasses? witnesses. A die-off leaves evidence. Bloated bodies in the brush. The smell carried on the wind. Scavengers circling. They found almost none of that. If hunters were responsible, somebody would be talking. Hog hunting is a sport, a business, an obsession in that part of the country. And a season that good would have been bragged about at every feed store and gas station for 50 miles. Nobody was bragging. The numbers simply weren't there to explain it. So the theory started multiplying in the gap where evidence should have been. A new pathogen, maybe, something that killed fast and left little behind. A behavioral shift. The hogs going nocturnal and deep and somehow slipping every camera. Some new pressure no one had named yet. And underneath all of it, the question that made the officials lean forward instead of relax. Because whatever was erasing the hogs was doing it cleanly, efficiently, and invisibly across a wide stretch of country with no human hand they could point to. And if it could do that to an animal as tough and as smart and as numerous as the feral hog, then the only responsible next question was the one nobody wanted to ask out loud. What was it? And could it touch anything else? To understand why that question carried real weight, you have to understand what they were dealing with. Feral hogs are not soft targets. They are one of the most successful large mammals on the continent precisely because almost nothing kills them efficiently. A mature boar can top 300 pounds. Armored with a shield of cartilage across its shoulders, thick enough to turn a knife. The tusks aren't decoration. They are curved, self-sharpening weapons that a cornered hog uses with a butcher's economy. But the muscle is the least of it. The thing that makes hogs nearly impossible to manage is between their ears. They are intelligent in a way that frustrates everyone who tries to outsmart them. Trappers in that country will tell you the same story with slightly different details. You build a corral trap. You bait it for 2 weeks until the whole sounder walks in and out like it's their own kitchen. And then you trigger the gate. You catch most of them, but you almost never catch all of them. And the ones that get away, the ones that feel that gate slam and see their family panic against the panels, those animals are educated for life. They will never enter a trap again. Not that trap. Not any trap. They learn the shape of the danger and they teach it. A sow leads her piglets along the edge of the bait and never lets them inside. The whole next generation inherits the lesson. Pressure a population with hunting and the survivors go nocturnal, shift their range, stop responding to calls. You don't reduce a smart prey species so much as you train it. And then there's the math, which is the part that breaks people. A single sow can breed before she's a year old. She can produce 2 litters a year, 4 to 6 piglets each, sometimes more. Run that forward across a population and you arrive at a number that wildlife biologists repeat like a grim mantra. To simply hold a hog population steady, not shrink it, just keep it from growing, you have to remove roughly 70% of it every single year. Miss that mark and the population doesn't drift upward. It explodes. So when officials looked at those empty pockets of Blanco County, they weren't just looking at hogs that had vanished. They were looking at a reproductive machine that had been switched off somehow in defiance of every model they trusted. Something was killing hogs faster than hogs could make more hogs. And that in that landscape was supposed to be impossible. So they did what serious people do when the data stops making sense. They went out and gathered more of it. One of the tools they leaned on was a method that sounds like something out of a spy thriller, and in a way it is. It's called a Judas pig. The idea is brutal and elegant. You capture a single hog, fit it with a GPS collar, and turn it loose. Hogs are intensely social. A lone hog wants nothing more than to find its kind. So the collared animal goes looking for a sounder, finds one, and betrays them, leading the trackers straight to a group they'd never have located on their own. It's a technique built on the one weakness in all that intelligence, the need to belong. The Judas pigs were collared. The signals went out and the collars led researchers to the groups, just as designed. But the groups weren't holding. Trackers would locate a sounder 1 week and return to find it smaller the next, then smaller again. The collared animal would wander, searching, and the cluster of hogs around it kept thinning out from underneath. Something was reaching into these groups and removing animals, picking them off, and doing it between visits, in the dark, in the brush, without scattering shell casings, or leaving the kind of carnage a person would leave. The collars were telling a story the officials didn't have a category for. The hogs weren't fleeing. They were being subtracted. Meanwhile, all of this was landing on top of an effort that had already cost the public a fortune. For years, the war on feral hogs in Texas and across the South had been an arms race funded with serious money. There were aerial gunning programs, contractors leaning out of helicopters with rifles, mowing down sounders from above at hundreds of dollars an hour. There were trapping operations with remote-triggered gates you could fire from a phone. There was research into chemical baits, toxicants engineered to kill hogs, that ran into furious controversy over what else might eat them. There was even work on hog birth control, a feed-delivered contraceptive meant to choke off that runaway reproduction at the source. Tens of millions of dollars, year after year, against an enemy that kept winning anyway. It was, as more than one frustrated official put it, like bailing out a sinking boat with a coffee cup while the water poured poured in faster than you could lift it. And now, suddenly, in pockets of the hill country, the boat was emptying on its own. That put the agencies in a strange and uncomfortable position. Because if something in the environment was already doing the job, doing it for free, doing it better than the helicopters and the poisons and the contraceptives combined, then continuing to dump money and bullets into those same areas might not just be wasteful. It might be actively counterproductive. You don't keep spraying a field that's already clearing itself, not until you understand what's clearing it. So a quiet decision started to form. In the specific zones where the collapse was happening, they would ease off, pause the expensive programs, stop intervening, and watch. Let the invisible thing keep working while they tried to figure out what exactly it was. That decision was practical. It was also, in its way, an admission. The professionals whose entire job was controlling this species were going to step back and let nature run the experiment, because nature was suddenly outperforming them. But the pause came wrapped around a knot of dread that nobody on those teams could fully shake, because stepping back assumed the thing in the dark was benign, and they had no evidence of that. An agent capable of erasing tough, wary, 300-pound animals across miles of country, cleanly and silently, was not automatically a friend. Was it a disease? And if so, could it jump? Could it touch livestock, pets, people? Was there a toxin moving through the food chain? Every empty trail camera card was a relief and a warning at the same time. So, before they could relax into the gift of disappearing hogs, they had to go back into the brush and find out what was actually out there. And the first real clue they found wasn't a carcass or a pathogen or a track they recognized. It was a place, a flattened patch of ground deep in the cedar that looked unmistakably like the scene of a fight. It sat in a low draw between two limestone rises, the kind of spot a sounder would bed down in to wait out the heat of the day. A field tech found it almost by accident following a faint game trail off a property where the trail cameras had gone dark weeks earlier. He stopped because the ground was wrong, not torn the way hogs tear it. That rooting churn that looks like a rototiller ran loose but scuffed, disturbed in a pattern. The cedar duff was raked into arcs like something had spun and dug in and braced. There were drag marks pressed into the soft soil, long shallow furrows leading off toward the brush line, the kind of marks a body makes when it's being pulled rather than walking. And there was blood, dried dark and old, smeared low across a fallen log and flecked up the pale trunk of a juniper at a height that made no sense for an accident. He stood there a long moment and did what anyone trained in this work does. He started reading it like a crime scene, because that's what it was. CSI out in the cedar breaks. So, hee for the things that should have been there. Shell casings, nothing. No brass winking in the dirt, no spent hulls, no boot prints stamped over the chaos, no ATV ruts, no cut fence, no bait pile gone sour. None of the signatures a human kill leaves behind. Whatever had happened here, no person had stood in this draw and pulled a trigger. He looked for the next obvious answer. A big cat. The hill country has its mountain lions, secretive and rare, and a lion will absolutely take a hog. But a lion kills a certain way, a throat or a nape bite, a single suffocating hold, and then it caches the carcass, drags it off and buries it under leaves and dirt to come back for later. There was no cache here. There was no clean single-point kill. There was a struggle that had sprawled across 30 feet of ground, messy and prolonged, with sign coming in from more than one direction. More than one direction. Stay with that. He crouched and found the tracks, and this is where the unease really set in, because the tracks weren't strange at all. They were ordinary, familiar. The neat little four-toed prints, the tidy oval pads, the claws registering ahead of each toe. Tracks anyone who's spent time in Texas could name in a heartbeat. He'd stepped over 10,000 of them in his career and never given a single one a second thought. Coyote, the most common, most dismissed, most thoroughly background animal in the entire landscape. The thing you hear yipping at dusk and forget by morning. But there wasn't one set. There were several, overlapping, coming and going, looping around the disturbed ground from multiple angles. And the pattern they made wasn't the pattern of a lone scavenger trotting up to a body that was already dead. It was the pattern of something arriving together, working together, surrounding something that had been very much alive when they got there. Familiar tracks, unfamiliar behavior. That mismatch is what he carried back out of the draw, and it's what he couldn't stop turning over on the drive back. Coyotes did not do this. Everyone knew that. Coyotes were edge animals, opportunists, the cleanup crew. They ate rabbits and cotton rats and grasshoppers and roadkill and whatever a rancher's trash pile offered up. They ate the leftovers of bigger kills. They did not, as a matter of established fact, surround and bring down a healthy juvenile hog. Not when the mothers of those juveniles were among the most ferociously protective animals in North America. A sow defending piglets is a wall of muscle and bone with razors mounted on her face. She will charge a man. She will gut a dog. The conventional wisdom, repeated in field guides and around feed store counters for as long as anyone could remember, was simple. A coyote that tried that would die trying. The risk wasn't worth the meal. And yet the draw said otherwise. The draw said a group of those familiar little predators had come into a hog's bedding ground and done something the rule book insisted they would would never do and had walked away from it, leaving the dragged remains of the loser fading into the brush. One disturbed patch of ground is an anomaly. It's a story you can argue with. So, the agencies did the thing that turns a hunch into evidence. They went back through the archive. Years of trail camera footage had been collected across these properties for the hog, for deer surveys, for everything. And most of it had been watched exactly once or never. Scanned for hogs and deer and then filed away and forgot. Now someone went back to look at the parts everyone had always ignored. The clips with coyotes in them. The throwaway footage. There was a particular set of files that kept coming up, recorded back in 2014 from a camera mounted on a feeder line in open savanna country. At the time, whoever logged it had tagged it as routine. Coyotes on a carcass, scavenging. Nothing to flag, nothing to study, the kind of thing you click past in half a second. For nearly a decade, it had sat in that folder, mislabeled by an assumption nobody thought to question. Because the assumption was the whole problem. The people watching had decided in advance what coyotes were capable of, and so they saw what they expected to see. A few opportunists picking at something already dead, and they never let the footage tell them otherwise. This time, someone watched it differently, watched it slowly, watched it the way you watch a tape when you've just stood in a bloody draw with the wrong tracks in it, and you've stopped being sure you know anything. They started the clip over from the beginning, before the carcass, before the feeding, back to the part nobody had ever bothered to study. The minutes leading up to it, and what was on the screen in those minutes was not a few hungry animals stumbling onto a free meal. It was a hunt. Planned, patient, coordinated hunt. And once they saw it, they could not unsee it, and they could not go back. Watch it again, frame by frame, and the choreography is undeniable. In the wide gray wash of the infrared, a sounder moves through the savanna at dusk. A sow, two younger females, a loose scatter of striped juveniles trotting at their heels. They are not panicked. They are feeding, rooting, doing what hogs do. And along the tree line, low and unhurried, the coyotes are already in position. There are 5 of them. Watch what they do. One walks out into the open, deliberate, almost casual, and lets itself be seen. The sow snaps her head up. She wheels toward the intruder, ears forward, that whole wall of muscle pivoting to face the threat she's been trained by a million years of instinct to face. She lowers her head. She charges, and the coyote gives ground, not in terror, but in measurement, peeling away at an angle, drawing her out, stretching the distance between the mother and her young by 10 feet, then 20, then 30. That's when the other 4 move. They come from downwind, from the flank she's no longer watching, ears barely clearing the grass, bodies flat to the ground. They don't go for the sow. They were never going for the sow. They cut into the gap she left behind, into the scatter of juveniles, and they pick one. Not the closest, the slowest, the one that hesitated. 2 of them lock onto it from opposite sides, and the whole thing collapses into a few seconds of thrashing gray, and a sound the microphone can barely hold. And by the time the sow understands she's been played and comes thundering back, the pack has already broken contact and melted into the brush with what they came for. 5 seconds. The entire sequence lasted less than 5 seconds, and it was not luck. It was not desperation. It was a tactic executed by animals who knew their roles before the sun went down. The bait, the flankers, the closers, the kind of cooperative role-divided hunting that field guides reserve for wolves on the tundra and lions on the savanna. Not for a song dog, not for the coyote everyone had spent a century writing off as a glorified scavenger. And here is the part that stopped people cold. This wasn't a fluke from a single brilliant pack. Once researchers knew what they were looking at, they found it again and again. Different counties, different cameras, different years. The same divided labor, the same surgical focus on the juveniles, the same instinct to never ever fight the mother, and instead to make her fight herself. The behavior wasn't an accident. The behavior was spreading. That's the thing about coyotes that the rulebook never accounted for. They are the most adaptable predator on the continent. The animal that survived every poison, every bounty, every government campaign aimed squarely at wiping it off the map, and answered all of it by spreading into all 49 mainland states and the streets of every major city. When rabbits crash, they eat rodents. When the deer thin out, they eat fruit, insects, whatever the land offers. And the land had just offered them 6 million hogs. An endless, breeding, self-replenishing supply of soft, slow, protein-rich juveniles. An all-you-can-eat buffet that walked itself into the open every single night. A predator that opportunistic was never going to leave that on the table forever. It just had to learn the trick once. And coyotes learn. They learn fast, and they teach what they learn to the next generation. And the technique moves through the population like a rumor that turns out to be true. So the agency stopped guessing and went to the only evidence that can't lie. They started collecting scat across the affected ranges. They examined stomach contents from animals taken in other programs. They ran the DNA, and the results came back and confirmed the thing the footage had only suggested. In some areas, feral hog made up a major share of the coyote diet, not an occasional meal, a staple. These packs weren't nibbling at the edges of the hog problem. They were eating the next generation before it could grow up, before it could breed, before it could replace itself. They were doing, quietly, in the dark or free, the exact thing the government had spent millions of dollars and thousands of helicopter hours and entire poison programs trying and failing to do. And the moment officials understood that, they did something almost no one outside those rooms ever heard about. They started calling off the missions, the large-scale removals in those specific areas, the aerial gunning, the loud, scattering, expensive war got quietly paused. Because they finally understood that a helicopter doesn't just kill hogs. Panics everything under it. It breaks up the very packs that were doing the real work, sends them running for miles, fractures the structure those hunts depend on. They had been, without knowing it, disrupting the cure to fight the disease. And the better answer was to step back, get out of the way, and let the home team finish the job it had already started. That's the part that never made a press release. That's the silence the conspiracy theories rushed in to fill. The bioweapon stories, the genetically tampered super coyotes, the whispered rumors of hidden footage, and a new apex predator stalking the hill country. The truth was stranger and quieter than any of it. Nature had been correcting the mistake the whole time, and the hardest thing for the people in charge to do was simply nothing. But here's where it stops being a clean victory, because it isn't one. Not yet. A sow can throw 2 litters a year. Do that math against even a hungry coyote pack, and the hogs are still winning by sheer reproduction in most of those states.